Sister, 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 sister talk. 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 Something on your mind anytime. I'm here to listen. Sister talk. When you need someone who understands, I know what you're missing. Sister talk.
Still, you can call in at 212-757-1393. And later on, we will have hot topics. But with me, another amazing woman is MAJORA Carter. She's an urban revitalization strategy consultant, real estate developer, entrepreneur of numerous green businesses, winner of Blog Talk Pitch Contest, Peabody Award-winning broadcaster, recipient of many awards and honors. The list goes on and on. We just don't have enough time. And I am serious about that. Welcome to Sister Talk TV show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Between the break, I do have to say that I know she has a lot of admirers and groupies. I'm one of them now. I'm one of them now, and you will know why after I finish this. Now, an urban strategy consultant.
Mm-hmm.
How? Why? How?
I grew up in the South Bronx, and born and bred, still live there, and it's sort of like a poster child example of what urban blight actually looks like and the way it was treated. And you realize that the way those communities develop have everything to do with the way people from both the inside and outside of the community see themselves. And unfortunately, it's usually within a deficit. And so our approach to development it covers environmental, economic, and as well as social development, but in particular by using real estate development as a strategy to do so, to actually increase the numbers of people that are born and raised in these communities that many of us are taught and led to believe that there's no real value in that community. And that's why we're taught to measure success by why we leave them. And our approach is really to create the kind of community that people, because there's always talented people, coming from communities like ours and like all over the country, but we're not led to believe that that's where we should stay.
So you were one of those people that left your community.
Oh, born and bred to expect that. And I grew up in the middle of the burning Bronx, like literally when the Bronx was burning. There was years of financial disinvestment. Landlords were torching their building. The Bronx lost like 60% of its population. My family only stayed because my dad owned the house that we lived in. He was part of that Great Migration and bought our house in the 1940s, and it wasn't worth anything at the time, but it was shelter, and that's what we had. And so we didn't leave. But I got to, the sense was that if you have any real talent, you're gonna grow up and get out of there. And I was a kid, I was reading at 3. I was a pretty smart one. And from the moment I remember anybody telling me, it was just like, oh, you're gonna grow up and you're gonna go to college and you're gonna get out of here, you're gonna make something of yourself. And I was just like, oh yeah, of course, that's what you do. But then you realize, like, why do we believe that? Why is that just
what made you
normal?
Come back, though?
I only came back under duress. Like, I wasn't trying to save the community. I was broke, and I needed a cheap place to stay when I was going to graduate school. So it was my parents, the extra bedroom in my parents' house.
You can always go home, right?
Yeah, I'm glad they let me in. But, because there was a moment where I was like, my mother was like, oh, I'm the youngest of 10. So it's like I was the last, So she was like, really? And my dad was like, oh, it's our baby girl. So I stayed, and it was, thank God, it was the most amazing thing that happened, because I got to see my community, frankly, for the way that it had been treated for so long, as again, as a place where, where you see environmental problems happen, where economic problems happen, where it's just sort of like we're the repository for all the things that wealthier and wider communities can afford to avoid. And that also includes, quite frankly, the sort of stewing pot for the fact that the talented ones in our own communities are expected to leave, and we're not expected to fully participate and support our own community.
Speaking of talent, in your bio, it says your work is characterized by an emphasis on talent retention.
Yes.
On the corporate and community level. Break that down for us.
Yeah. So again, the whole idea is that there's this feeling that if you are born, if you're one of the bright ones in a community, people will tell you you're going to grow up and be somebody and get out of those communities. And so that's the fact that the talented ones are expected to leave. But if you run a company and you invest in your workforce, you're hoping that if you pay good attention to them, pay them well enough, give them enough benefits, that they'll stay. But that's not the kind of attitude that we have in low status communities like the South Bronx. It's more like, you're talented, we're going to get you out of here and forget about the other people there because they're never really going to do anything anyway. And then we wonder why those communities don't actually do well. I mean, think about the fact what happened during the last time we actually might have had racially segregated but economically diverse communities. It was actually a pre-integration. But so it wasn't uncommon for a black doctor to live near a black janitor. But you got to see yourself in all of these models. We don't see that in our communities.
Tell us about the Startup Box software services.
Right, so Startup Boxes was one of the ways to retain the talent in our own community. We knew that there was a lot of digitally prepared folks within our community, whether they had, whether they'd spent money on their own education in technology, or if they didn't, but they were everyone's digitally savvy at this point. We also knew that folks weren't getting opportunities to be hired by the tech companies because it's notoriously white and male. So we actually started our own B2B business where we sold software services to the industry and hired our own staff in order to do that.
Boogie Down, was it?
Boogie Down Grind Cafe.
Yeah, Boogie Down Grind Cafe.
Again, another thing that we knew is that we keep taking money from our own community and we spend it in somebody else's. Part of what the value of having your own community is that you create the kind of a circular economy so dollars can stay in your own community and support your community. We knew people were taking their own money and spending it on places, whether it was Starbucks or whatever. And so we started our own coffee shop. It's the only 100% locally owned by two families of color within the community, and it's called the Boogie Down Grind Cafe.
What were the challenges for you to do all of this?
I'm a black woman. So, which means access to capital is really difficult. It means that, generally underestimated, and it's another reason why where I think it's so important using venues like this to make sure that folks understand supporting black-owned businesses is a really important thing, and not just with talking about it, but actually putting your money where your mouth is.
Where do you get this gumption from?
God. I mean, bottom line is, I feel like this is part of my ministry.
I always that's true, but I always think there's something in your DNA, your grandmother, somebody there.
We're from a long line of people who we didn't survive the Middle Passage just so that we can give up so easily. And, I'm 2 generations out of slavery, and I always hold that really very closely.
I'm going to ask you something. You're a part of the Bronx, period. Like you said, you remember when the Bronx blew up. You had a brother that was killed also. Has that inspired you in any way to make a change in your community? It
was one of the things that inspired me to want to leave it. To be honest, yeah, that was one of the reasons where it's just this is what happens, to folks in our communities, and why is that considered normal? And I don't want that to happen to anybody else. I mean, he got caught up in the life, and that basically led to his death. And we see that a lot with a lot of young men and women these days, and I think part of it is that do they feel like there's other opportunities out there for them? And in many of our communities, we're led to believe that there aren't those opportunities.
Right.
That's why I'm focusing, hell-bent on making sure that that economic development, local ownership of homes and businesses is something that we need to be seeing and really be proactively working toward for our own benefit, for future wealth creation, and not just saying that gentrification happens when you start seeing white people in the community. It starts happening when we don't value our own communities, when we sell early and cheap because we don't see the value, when we don't think that people having their own power, having their own business is something that other people do. No, this should be normal for our communities as well.
Thank you so much. How can people get in contact with you?
MAJORACarterGroup.com.
Thank you so much.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
To the word, I'll be right there. Sister talk, sister, 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 sister talk. Sister Talk.